This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Kicking off today's show is K-State's Jagger, Harvey, and Jared Crain to discuss a climate-resilient cereals lab that will support agriculture around the world. AJ Tarpoff, K-State beef veterinarian, continues the show to talk about what producers need to think about when introducing new livestock to their herd. Rounding out today's show is K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd, explaining what nuisance pets might be seeking warmer places inside homes. He also mentions the benefits of cleaning up lawn and garden debris. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show discussing the Feed the Future Climate Resilient Cereals Innovational Lab. And to talk about this lab, we're joined by the director of it, Jagger Harvey, and associate director, Jared Crain. Jagger, Jared, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Jagger, could you first tell us a little bit about what is this project?
So this project is really an ambitious endeavor so that we can help farmers from Kansas to Kathmandu grow their cereal crops under worsening climatic conditions. So as our listeners are very painfully personally aware, for example, in western Kansas, it was scorched then soaked, as has been referred to in the media, for the wheat harvest. And it was the lowest wheat harvest in over half a century. So climate issues for rain-fed cereal agriculture are a problem around the world, and it's something we're confronting today, and it's projected to just get worse over time. So this is K-State's fifth Innovation Lab, which is a U.S. Agency for International Development's mechanism to mobilize the strengths of the U.S. land-grant university system, schools like K-State and our partners. It's under the Feed the Future initiative, which is the U.S. whole-of-government initiative to alleviate poverty and hunger overseas. And what the Feed the Future initiative does with innovation labs is it brings U.S. and international scientists together to apply the most appropriate advanced science to solve some of the most complex challenges in agriculture, again, from Kansas to around the world.
So what are some of those challenges that you guys are working on?
So this particular innovation lab, as the title suggests, is focused on climate-resilient cereals. So the cereals that it focuses on are millet, sorghum, wheat, and rice. And about 60% of cereals globally are rain-fed, so they're not irrigated. And what this innovation lab does is it works on upstream germplasm enhancement. So the basic seeds in a breeder's toolbox that they use to cross and produce the varieties that Kansas farmers or Kenyan farmers or farmers around the world ultimately plant in their fields. So we're working 5 to 10 years upstream of the varieties that will be produced for farmers so that they can be more resistant to drought, heat, flooding in places like South Asia, that's a big problem, salinity of the soils, and a lot of other issues.
So you mentioned a lot of issues there, Jagger, and so how are you hopefully going to solve them?
What we've done is we looked at what is the upstream science that we need to apply to really move the needle on making our cereal crops more climate resilient. So we brought in some of the best scientists in the world from across the land-grant system and from our partner countries as well, so that we basically have a science engine, so different scientific capacities, different science leaders who can use things like advanced computer modeling and supercomputers, drones flying over fields and taking hyperspectral images and doing machine learning type analysis, crunching all those numbers and coming up with predictions of what we should cross, what we should move forward, so again, cereal breeders around the world can produce varieties that will fare a lot better with rising temperatures, falling rainfall, and issues like that.
And this lab isn't actually a physical lab, just kind of the idea of having one together. And so of this lab team, who is on it?
When we put this project together, we took a consortium approach saying, who are the best universities in the land grant system across the entire United States that have all these different capacities, everything from, as Jagger was mentioning, that artificial intelligence, advanced crop modeling. The lab were mandated to work on 4 different cereals, rice, wheat, sorghum, and millet. So one of the partners is Louisiana State University working on rice, University of Florida working with machine learning, crop modeling. And then with Kansas, the Wheat Genetics Resource Center is bringing a wealth of information and knowledge for both germplasm to evaluate in the field, as well as the capacity and the cutting edge technology to how to evaluate that germplasm, how to identify particular seeds and move that forward to farmers' fields. So K-State's taking a lead in the wheat realm. Additional partners, Clemson University is really kind of the core U.S. partner with sorghum and millet. And then Delaware State University is bringing nutritional analysis. So once we grow these seeds, making sure that when people eat them, they are getting a nourishing product. And Cornell University as well is assisting through one of their programs called Breeding Insights. So helping to manage this big data, everything from genomics to flying the UAVs or the drones and having thousands and thousands of images. So data management of all this. So that is the U.S.-based consortium. Not only are we in those 4 crops, but we have to be in Western Africa, Eastern or Southern Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. And at this time, we can't reveal who those partners are, but that will be forthcoming very soon with partners in all of those regions and across the 5 years, then expanding out to even more individuals and countries.
And it sounds like a large exemplary team to be working on this climate resilient cereals project. And so as you progress forward, what do you really want to have as a conclusion or as a product for people?
So when I was talking with our colleagues at USAID, and they were explaining, I can't put words in their mouth, I can't speak on their behalf, but when they were explaining really what USAID's vision for this program was, it's again to really move the needle, since we have to have 70% more cereal production by 2050 to feed the estimated 10 billion people that there will be in the world in a harsher and harsher climate. So they really wanted to make sure that they supported the land grant system to flex our full capacity to move the needle to produce climate resilient cereals. So part of that is to continue building the capacity of these breeders in our partner countries. There are some fantastic breeders that we're partnering with around the world. They're already extremely successful at producing varieties that farmers and consumers prefer in their countries. Many of them have been trained in advanced universities here in the U.S. land grant system as well and gone back. So looking forward, we want to equip them so that within and beyond this program, they can continue adapting their breeding efforts to a changing climate, using things like computer modeling to look into their crystal ball, see what the climate might be like in 10 years, decide if they want to continue planting corn in certain parts of the country or if something like sorghum and millet will fare much better. And so we want to deliver for USAID, for U.S. agriculture, for global agriculture to continue increasing yield stability in a changing climate, so that we can honestly have a more stable world. Because when people can feed their children, when you don't have the famines that we've seen with the worst drought in 40 years in East Africa, where 1 million people are displaced, it drives immigration, it drives conflict. So really it's a win-win. We're working together through this program. We can really make sure that collectively we can have that 70% more cereal production that's needed by 2050.
So as we're thinking about these ag producers and the work they're doing, what do you hope this means to them?
We're hoping that this work is going to result in more climate resilient crops, higher yield, sustained yield under drought conditions, high heat, whatever that environment that crop is growing in. But particularly right here at home in Kansas in the U.S., this network provides us with an opportunity as scientists to reach out and get a global reach to evaluate germplasm in different environments and locations, to different diseases that maybe aren't in the U.S., but in today's global connected world, it's probably not a question of if they get to the U.S., but when. So really starting to look forward and protect the germplasm supply that even U.S. farmers are going to be able to utilize through some of the work internationally as well.
So in the bigger picture, helping people and helping economies overseas, really, of course, I think we have a moral imperative to help and alleviate hunger and malnutrition around the world. And at the same time, it's been shown and proven that by USAID and the U.S. government investing and working on these problems together with partner country governments, it does drive agriculture-led growth in those countries. I was born in Haiti. I grew up in Haiti in the U.S. I grew up near farmers who are struggling with these kind of issues, both in the U.S. and in Haiti. I lived in Kenya before I moved to Kansas. And in Kenya, for example, the average farmer is a woman who has poor soils, unimproved seeds that she's just stored. She throws them out on the soil on an acre, and she hopes that it'll rain with very little fertilizer. And so what we want to do is work to transform those kind of farmers so they can lift themselves out of poverty. Kenya is now a middle-income country. It's no longer a low-income country, partly because of efforts like this innovation lab and USAID work. And so it's been shown that if you look from 2010 to 2020, almost two-thirds of the growth in U.S. goods exports was to major USAID partners. So as we help these developing country economies grow, it helps national security, and it helps to increase U.S. goods export overseas as well. So again, it really is a win-win.
And if people would like to find out more information about this lab, where can they do that?
Well, since we were just announced at the World Food Prize just a few weeks ago, at this point it's just me and Jared, but we are looking to stand up a website. We're getting the team together, but certainly they can reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk to them and share more information as we get underway.
That was Director of the Feed the Future Climate Resilient Cereals Innovational Lab, Jagger Harvey, and the Associate Director of that lab, Jared Crain. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead.
You're tuned back into Agriculture Today. I'm Allie Nippert for Shelby Varner, and we continue our Thursday show talking about a recent K-State Beef Tips newsletter article with K-State beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. A.J., thanks for being here today.
Always a pleasure to be on.
You recently published a newsletter about disease concerns with new herd introductions. Why might this be an area of concern for producers?
Yeah, so right now our total herd numbers are a little bit down. And that's okay. But eventually, we will expand the cow herd again. And that means bringing in new introductions, bringing in new animals. And while that's great, there is a potential disease introduction concern that comes when we're bringing in new animals to the herd. Now, these herd expansions, it's not going to be the same for everyone. Maybe some producers are thinking about expansion this coming year, maybe the year after. But it's never too early to start planning ahead and start thinking about some of these scenarios and start working through what's going to work best for me.
And talking about scenarios with new animals, how do these introductions affect the animals that were already there?
With new animal introductions, a great way to think about it is all animals in their own individual farms have been exposed to different types of pathogens. Okay. Now, they are not sick. They look absolutely normal. But some of those specialized pathogens from each farm, they can circulate at low levels. Okay. And that's normal. That's kind of the normal circulating bugs within an area. Now, when we take animals and we transfer them to a new area, or maybe through a sale barn, or maybe through a different commingling area, or all of a sudden we get new animals and we drop them off. Well, now we have animals that have different types of pathogens, that they have different levels of immunity to different things, and then we put them all together. It's the basics of commingling. So now what that can do is that new introduction, it can bring things from its home farm. Okay. It can actually be carrying or being a carrier of a disease of concern. So what do we do about it? And I think it comes down to the basics of how disease spreads. So disease can spread nose to nose. That's kind of the one thing we always think about. Here we're coming into cold and flu season, sneezing, nose to nose contact, wiping your face and shaking hands with somebody. That's an easy one to think about. But also bloodborne transmission. we have a few diseases of concern that are transmitted through blood and can be transmitted either through needles, like vaccine needles, or from external parasites like ticks, right? So we have some of those. We have diseases that can be transmitted through fecal material. So as they defecate and it builds up in the environment, that can actually spread to the rest of the group. So those are all different ways that diseases can spread. And that's not all inclusive. There are other ways that disease can spread as well. But those are very common ones. And those common methods are what we need to keep in mind when we're making a game plan on introducing new animals.
And talking about those diseases, is there a way to reduce the chances of it entering the herd when you bring those new animals in?
Yeah. I mean, we know it's a concern. We know animals are exposed to different levels of pathogens. But again, like you said, what do we do about it? Well, it's having the plan. One of the easiest things we can do to implement a plan is, one, work with your local veterinarian. Have that conversation ahead of time. Okay, what should we do? What's going to be practical? Because your local vet understands your operation, understands what you're working with, what facilities you have, what previous health issues you may or may not have had. So they can be a world of information and that localized expertise for your operation. Now, a part of that conversation might be quarantine. Hey, I'm sure everybody remembers quarantine from COVID times, but quarantine truly is an important time for cattle. Okay, we can bring in new herd introductions. We can segregate them from the rest of the home herd. We can wait maybe 30, 45 days. If they do have any transient viruses, let's say, kind of like the cold in people, well, it's going to circulate through those animals and they're going to be healthy and happy and go lucky. They can get introduced to some of our new management, our water, our nutrition, the new environment, the fences. They kind of get a good grasp where they calm down. Then we can slowly introduce those animals to the rest of the home herd. That's one thing. So quarantine, I think above all else, quarantine, working with your veterinarian, trying to implement some of the home herd health plans, herd health plans, such as vaccinations, such as some of our parasite control. Okay, one thing, if anybody's listening to this, just remember one animal that's carrying lice can transmit lice to the rest of your entire herd. Okay, so that's biosecurity at its finest. That's why we want to quarantine. That's why we want to implement or treat certain things before we introduce those animals to the rest of the home group.
And talking about biosecurity, is there a way to test for certain diseases before even bringing the animals home?
There are some diseases of concern that are very common, unfortunately, in the cattle industry that might be of a big concern. Okay, during that quarantine period might be a great time to test for some of these diseases if it's a disease of concern. Okay, and that's where the conversation with your local vet, should I be testing for anything? If we're bringing in replacement heifers or maybe going to develop some replacement heifers that you purchase, possibly things like a BVD virus, right? We might want to get persistent PI tests done on those animals where they take little ear notches to make sure that they're not carrying that virus for their entire life. There are other diseases like, anaplasmosis, other bloodborne diseases. They may not show up immediately, but we want to know for sure whether they have it or not. So there are a handful of diseases we can routinely test for. We can test the entire group if you purchase a group of animals, but work with your vet. We have a wonderful diagnostic lab here at K-State that can help walk you through that. So yes, we have the opportunity to test for disease, quarantine for disease, vaccinate against some of these issues, but it also comes down to time and time management. So keep in mind, we do have risky periods to bring in new animals. We're getting close to calving season for many folks, whether they're in fall calving or getting ready for spring calving coming into the new year. If you're going to introduce new animals, kind of one of that critical period, if you are in calving season, that's kind of a hands-off time to introduce new animals. One animal from an outside source can introduce pathogens that can cause a big scours outbreak. Okay, so that's something to be concerned about. Maybe hold off or quarantine for a little bit longer if your home herd is right in the middle of calving. But outside of that, work with your local veterinarian and have a plan going forward if you do start your own herd expansion.
Timing is very critical for new introductions, and so when is the best time for producers to introduce new animals?
Well, the best time is obviously when you can get them bought for the right price, I suppose. No, but in reality, yes. For the home herd, the most risky time, in my opinion, would be during calving season. I'm sure there's many folks out there have heard horror stories about buying a milk cow or a graft calf during calving season and having a scours outbreak. So, I mean, that one's pretty good, understood. The other period of time is during breeding season. Okay, that early breeding season, that early embryo is very delicate and at risk for some very common viruses and things like that can be circulating in new introductions. So we want to be cautious during those two periods of time, but really we can manage around those. Okay, we can use quarantine to our advantage. We can purchase animals from maybe that have been previously disease tested. Okay, from a reputable source. We can reduce our own risk by going through the steps, planning accordingly, and making good purchase decisions.
And AJ, whenever producers are ready to begin their herd expansion, what are those steps that they should take?
Okay, yeah, just as a review, before you buy them and before you have questions, contact your local vet. Have that good, conversation and understanding. Make sure you go through, how do I introduce these animals to my home vaccine herd health plan? What parasites I might have to treat for, anything else I need to be concerned, and even disease testing. After that, pre-plan and understand when you're going to bring them in, okay, who you're going to purchase them from, what you're going to do, how long you're going to quarantine them. Again, remember 45 days is kind of a good, general rule that can cover a lot of our transient things like a common cold. So quarantine, talk to your vet, plan accordingly, and really hopefully we get moisture and we have good pasture conditions for whenever this expansion occurs.
Once again, that was K-State beef veterinarian AJ Tarpoff on disease concerns with new herd introductions. I'm Allie Nippert for Shelby Varner, and before we cut to a short break, we're going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and University of Illinois professor Jonathan Capes as they discuss a farm bill not being a recent exception.
The 2018 Farm Bill has been extended. Over the weekend, chairs and ranking members of the Senate and House Agriculture Committees announced a one-year extension of the current Farm Bill, a measure originating from continuing federal budget debates in Congress that threatened passage of a new Farm Bill by the end of this year. At a recent Farm Foundation forum, University of Illinois professor Jonathan Capes said Farm Bills passing in the year of originally intended date of completion has been rare of late.
Farm Bill in 1996 began in 1995. Complicated by budget issues. What became the 2002 Farm Bill really began being debated in 2001, so that stretched over multiple years. Again, what became the 2008 Farm Bill started in 2007. And the current record holder for the longest stretch is the Farm Bill that got enacted in early 2014, and it really began in 2011. It was supposed to have been reauthorized in 2012. And then the 2018 Farm Bill is actually the only one in recent history that has been reauthorized within the year of the expiration.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was USDA's Rod Bain and University of Illinois professor Jonathan Capes. We are cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. As we move further into fall, cooler temperatures across the state are forcing some insect pests to seek warmer places inside our homes. Fortunately, K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd says we don't need to be overly concerned, just maybe keep the vacuum handy. As for those pests that overwinter outdoors, he suggests doing what we can now to help alleviate problems next spring. Raymond, we're into that season where we're starting to see a lot of nuisance pests, and I guess essentially those are ones that move from the outdoors to the indoors.
Yeah, Jeff, that is correct. Right now, a number of insect pests are out there. Actually, nuisance pests are not really major pests, but one of them is the box elder bug, which feeds on Aster the box elder. They'll sun themselves on the south side or west side of the building and move in. Other ones that'll come in like elm leaf beetle, clover mites. They'll come in, but because the environment ends up being too dry, the heaters are up, the humidity is too low, they end up dying out. But you can basically take a vacuum them up, and then put them back outside. Same thing, millipedes, centipedes, crickets, they'll start coming in too. But again, with that low humidity, they normally don't survive very long.
So most likely, a lot of times we're seeing really just the dead bugs.
Well, coming into the home, they will be eventually, One of the ways to remedy that is caulk or seal cracks and crevices on those sides of the building. You can apply some type of insecticide which might repel them, but really the easiest is just try to exclude them somehow. And then when they do come in, just vacuum or sweep them up and put them back outside.
That's kind of the nice thing is we really don't have to do a lot here, just kind of general maintenance, make sure that the house is clean.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, just keep it clean. The other one is the Asian ladybird beetle, which congregates on the window seals on the south side. They'll stay there throughout the winter, and then they'll be active in the spring. They'll want to go outside. But again, vacuum them out and just put them back outside.
So there are some things that will overwinter?
Yeah, the Asian ladybird beetle will overwinter in homes because in China they normally overwinter in cliffs, but Kansas is short on cliffs, so they come into the homes. And they generally do survive even under those low humid conditions. They tend to congregate higher up in the windows near the ceilings. But some of the ones that reside lower on the floor level, like clover mites and some others, they will probably dry up and eventually die because the humidity is just too low for them.
Anything that might overwinter outdoors in debris or mulch, things like that?
Oh, yeah. There's a number of insects, squash bug overwinters in debris, and that's a good segue into the sanitation concept where if you remove the debris after the end of the growing season, leaves and old tomato plants or whatever, those will remove or they don't serve as overwintering sites for some of these insects. I think the squash bug, of course, the bagworm, they will overwinter as eggs in the bags, and that's why we recommend hand removal during this time of year. You'll be removing between 500 or 1,000 eggs on the female bags. On the male bags, there's nothing in them. Those are the ones with the brown papery cases. But that's another way to alleviate, not eliminate, but alleviate a problem for next year, yeah.
And we'll start to see them emerge then in the spring?
The ones that emerge as adults, for example, squash bug, and there's some other vegetable pests that'll overwinter as adults, you'll start seeing them come out early on. They'll mate, and then they'll lay eggs, and then you'll get your first generation.
So the work we do now will, I guess, mean less work in the spring?
There's no guarantee, but the more you do in the front end, the less you'll have to do in the back end. But, of course, a lot of these insects are migratory. They fly around. But I know in my yard, when I remove bagworms or time the spray applications, I have no bagworms throughout the rest of the year.
I know there's always that debate as to does a really severely cold winter impact what we see the following spring in terms of insect pests?
Well, that's a good point, but it has to be very severe. We're talking temperatures down to 10 to 20 below zero for a week or two have an impact. When you get like a one day minus 10 back up to 34 or 40, that has minimal impact on insect populations. And that's why they have these mechanisms and means to overwinter. And that's what they do. They slow down their metabolism. They have their own antifreeze. They have been here longer than us, and they have evolved to sustain themselves under environmental conditions that are harsh.
Fall and winter are also a good time to just kind of catch up on some reading, and Extension has a lot of publications.
We do. We keep putting them out. A lot of fact sheets. If you are interested, you can go to your Extension office, county Extension office, and see what they have, or you can contact the bookstore at Kansas State University about what Extension publications are available.
That's K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd. For more information on nuisance pests, contact your local Extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.